Now let's talk about how you can create engaging LinkedIn copy. Now, as someone who has written for Forbes, Inc., the HuffPost, and tons of other publications, I'll be sharing some of my favorite tips, as well as some examples. So here's the first one. Now, this may be a bit difficult to see, but I'll go ahead and include the links in here, so you can go ahead and take a look at this later. Feel free to pause the video and look at this in more detail. So I'll be sharing some of the things I really like about it. So it starts off mentioning a specific target audience, which is software leaders. And then it has kills deals. So these are things that software leaders, that matter to them, is the deal size, deal volume, and so on. So going back to our original lesson on understanding your audience, this is crucial. And I think Matt does an extremely good job of really understanding his target audience and what are some of the challenges keeping them up at night. He goes on to share, stats as well as some practical tips in a very, very clear, easy to share format. And this is a teaser. He's sharing a clip at the bottom, which is not included in here. So he does podcasts. And what most people who are doing podcasts are sharing video clips, they will just share the clip and say, okay, this is the title, nothing else. But what Matt really does is he really provides a really, really strong hook here. Now, if you think of the best, movies, why do you go to see them? It's the hook or the teaser or the trailer, right? And I think Matt has done a very, very good job of this in nearly all of his posts and really understanding, once again, who is the audience, calling them out, and then talking about specific challenges that they're having, and then providing solutions around it. So first off, some quick tips in writing engaging content is start with a strong hook. Because if you don't have a strong hook, you don't have a strong first line, no one's going to read it. The same thing with, getting a book. There's no chance you're going to read a book where the title itself bores you to death. So having a strong title or a strong hook is extremely, extremely important. So what are some of the things you can do to have a strong hook? Call out the audience. This is a super hack that I think I learned when I was at LinkedIn. And Matt does it there perfectly. So he focuses on SaaS and software leaders. So he's constantly mentioning them in his post, particularly at the very beginning. Now, why is this important? So I give the analogy in my classes about the crowded space test. So if you're in a crowd and someone yells out, your university or your name or something that triggers your attention, then you're going to stop and check out what that is. So the same thing is applicable on social media. The more you can mention a particular audience and be specific. So for example, one of my clients was going after finance professionals originally, but they found that they got much better traction when they were going after publicly listed CFOs in a particular market. And they mentioned that, and actually the conversion rates, everything was significantly higher. So anytime you can call out the specific audience, you're going to have a much better chance of capturing their attention. Next, share an interesting stat. So you can share the amount of people who don't click on a particular ad, so particular stats like that. People always like to hear about that stuff because they want to see, okay, here's what's happening in the market. How can I go about, resolving any of these particular issues? Another thing you can do is you can pose a scenario, and we'll look at an example here in a little bit, but you can always say, imagine you are at the supermarket and you see a thief go by and steal something. Do you act or do you not? So once again, this is posing a scenario, and it really captures your attention because you want to find out the rest of the story. If you think of the basic stories, beginning, middle, and end, they want a beginning, they want a hook, they want to find out, okay, bringing them into the story. So that's just one example. Ask a question. So I tend to ask a lot of questions in my content because, the reason I ask the question is because I want people to think, okay, what's the answer? If it's a strong enough question or it's a question that's relevant to them, they're going to be more inclined to go and read the rest of it. So having a strong question can really help in terms of kickstarting your content. Another thing you want to do, and you saw in Matt's example, is short sentences, short paragraphs. You have to remember that most people are reading this either on their desktop and their mobile. So if you have a large chunk of text, it's very, very difficult to scan. You have to understand most people are scanning. They're not reading everything on social media. So breaking it down into smaller sentences, shorter paragraphs, I try to keep all my paragraphs within maximum 2 lines. That way it's easier for people to scan. And a good rule of thumb if you're in copywriting anyway is take whatever copy you have and cut it in half. If you're a really great copywriter, you cut it in half again. And I think that's the key, is to cut it down as much as possible. So short sentences, short paragraphs, make it clean and crisp. Another thing, and this is one of my favorite types of content that I don't think enough people share, is share something going to happen to you. So if you had a meeting with a client or partner, what was the key takeaway from it? What is something they said that they found, that is amazing? Now, caveat here is, you don't want to share the specific person's name unless you have their permission. Same with the company, but you can anonymize it. So I was having coffee with a friend or a contact in the financial services space, and they were having a question around blank. So I provided three ways to get around that. So once again, those work really, really well because you don't have to think about it. You just have to share what happened to you. And because it's relevant to your day-to-day, it's unique to you. Everything else you can kind of get away and kind of copy and paste from someone else. But if it's a story that's unique to you, it's very difficult. And once again, people relate to you more. Adding formatting. This is something that I've been experimenting with as well. Just to make it go back to what I was saying is make it easier to scan. Anytime you're using bullet points, or in Matt's case, he had the bolding there, it's easier for people to scan your content. In my case, I always try to stick to the rule of threes. So 3 points, and then I have number 1, here's the point, number 2, number 3, and so on. So once again, if people see that, they can just cut to that point and see what exactly they want to get to. Lastly is end with a question. Now, you don't have to do this on every single post, but this is really the power of social media, is really having a two-way dialogue. I think that's what most people forget when they're posting on social media, is they're just broadcasting. So in their mind, they're just a big billboard, and they're just pushing out their content, and they're assuming that everyone will just sit there like a cow and be like, people don't want that. They want to have a dialogue. They want to have a conversation with you. So I'll share a couple of examples. Josh Braun, who is a sales expert, does a really, really good job of this. So he has a question here. It says, you imagine you're at a mall and a kiosk person says, can I ask you a question? So he's actually ticking both boxes. He's posing a scenario and he's asking a question. And he says, what do you say? And then from here, what I really like that Josh does is he has the original and then he has a revision. So the original is what we would generally say, or the mistake that people are mostly making. And then he has a revision in terms of how he would tweak it. So I really, really like this style, and I think Josh has become kind of well known for it. But I think we can take this and we can apply it to what you're doing in your space as well. Now, I know what some of you might be saying is that, Joe, these posts are super long. Should we be writing that much content? Well, first, I'll be sharing why these people are writing longer posts. That's because LinkedIn has recently introduced that they're looking at things like view time or amount of time spent on a particular post. So the longer you spend viewing or reading a particular post, then that shows more preference in terms of the algorithm. So that's why more people are writing longer posts. But once again, as you can see from the example just now, is that they're writing it in a way where it is longer. You take more time to read it, but then it's very easy to scan because the sentences, the paragraphs are super short, no more than 2 lines. So that's a trick. If you want to write longer copy, break it up into shorter sentences, shorter paragraphs. Now, here's an example which is not so long, and I think it kind of sums up what we're talking about. So David says, Spotify wrapped up, but for marketers, keep hearing the same thing in 2020. So once again, he's mentioning a particular audience and a date. So marketers in 2020, and he's posing the questions that they have. And then at the very end, he says, what do I miss? So once again, he's taking an opportunity for people to engage, because obviously the more people engage with your post, the better it'll perform in the algorithm. So those are some quick hacks and you can use to boost your own LinkedIn copy. If you're not sure where to start, you can leverage different formats. There's tons of different copywriting formats and templates available, one of which is A.I.D.A, which is attention, interest, desire, and action. So we talked about capturing the interest attention of our audience, make sure it's something that they're interested in, and then slowly guiding them towards taking some kind of desirable action. Now, if you want, let me know, and I can provide a deep dive on this particular framework and some other ones. But this one should be a good one for you to get started. My final tip is really to write like you speak. I often see, and I was mentioning this to a client recently, is that I spoke to the person and they were very straightforward, very blunt. It's their style. But when I read their copy, it was very fluffy, very, it was very formal. And I was like, okay, is this even the same person writing it, or did you have a ghostwriter? So act like you are, write like you were speaking, but obviously you might want to tweak your tone. So maybe you want to write like you are speaking to your boss or your client or your partner. So keep it maybe a little bit more formal if you're doing that, but it has to be in your tone or your style. Otherwise, people will see that and then they'll meet you and they'll be like, okay, these are two different personalities. It's a bit schizophrenic. So make sure you're writing as you speak. So try those out. Let me know how that worked for you. And if you want, I will do a deep dive on some of the frameworks that I just mentioned.